You know, Mercy, we don't often talk about insurance. It's not a common topic. But today you have an exciting study that you and I have been working on that we'd like to share with others about how people make decisions about insurance, and how to think about targeting people for insurance beyond where they work or how much income they earn. But first, let's start with you introducing yourself and why, or what drew you to this project.
Okay, thank you so much, Rehab. Okay, I'm so excited to be here today because this is one of the projects that it has been so exciting to work on. And to just give you a brief introduction about myself, my name is Mercy Kiptai. I work in Busari as a senior analyst. And to take you through about a brief introduction of this specific project is, in this specific project, you were looking at how people make decisions before they make that step to take an insurance or to transfer risk. And we were looking at it in a sense like people don't normally look at other behavioral aspects, but people have been measuring people who are ready to take insurance or to transfer risk by, for example, their demographics, which the major demographic that people normally use is income, right?
Yeah.
So for this specific study now, we are looking at it in a behavioral lens where we are saying that it is more than a demographic or who the person is. It is more about how does this person think before making that step.
And so that's very interesting because we find actually that a lot of people who can afford insurance are not buying insurance. So they remain uninsured even when affordable insurance exists. Why is that?
Yes, that was quite an interesting thing to find in literature because we found that two people might be earning the same income, which it can help them afford to buy an insurance. But the way you see them making decisions on how they spend their money and how they transfer their risk is totally different. So for this specific thing, we are thinking now in a behavioral lens. Like, for example, it is not just about who the person is, but how they think about themselves and how they view insurance and even risk transfer. For example, for this specific study, we were looking at different behavioral aspects that determine someone's or guide someone before taking an insurance.
And drive their behavior.
Yes.
Okay. And so, what are the shortcomings of insurance companies using traditional methods? I'm calling them traditional just because this is how insurance companies typically would target people. They look at their earning capability to determine whether they would target you for insurance or not. So what are the shortcomings of doing it this way?
Okay, true. So using traditional where we target mostly people in terms of mostly what people are using, which is income, I can say it has some drawbacks. For example, that one will limit. We might have people who may be able to transfer that risk, but their income is not much as what you're targeting. For example, you might have a very design on how you're targeting people, maybe people with certain income and above. These are the people who can be able to achieve insurance, not knowing that we have people who may not have that such kind of an income, but they can still be able to transfer risk. And now we are restricting them now from transferring risk
or
and
excluding
even excluding them from this aspect of transferring risk, which it is safer for them.
Okay.
Yes.
So why is it important for us to think of insurance as a behavioral decision and not just a financial one?
Oh, that is an interesting question, Rehab. I want us to think about insurance. Insurance is mostly an emotional thing. It is how people even live with others and how they trust others. It is how people are being driven by their beliefs. So even
how they plan
their future. That's very right. And you see, if we now exclude this one when we are doing our products, for example, if you're an insurance, you will be able to create products that doesn't even connect with the people that you're targeting.
Okay. Yes. You're right. But you mentioned that this study uses something called a lab in the field design. Yes. Could you tell us in simple terms what that is?
Okay, interesting. So a lab in the field is a research approach where we bring our participants together and we now give them activities where these activities can be, for example, games, can be, for example, an experiment where we do it in the field, and this experiment now they are being simulated in a way people live in real life. This is now help us to get how people normally make decisions authentically without being self-reported questions.
Okay. So how do you actually simulate these real life situations for insurance participants?
Okay, interesting. So for this specific one, I can give an example for this specific study that we were doing on how we simulated one of it.
Yeah.
So for this study, we were measuring, for example, trust is a key thing when it comes to insurance. And how do we simulate this one and do it even in the field as an experiment? So what we do is we create a situation, or we create a scenarios. For example, when it comes to a trust game, it has two players. Where in this specific study, player number one was a participant, and then this participant was playing with an insurance officer, and twice he was playing with an insurance officer and also playing with a community member.
So there's one. So you tell a participant they're player number one, and they have a player number two who is an insurance provider, and player three who is a community member.
Exactly.
Okay.
And how do we now measure trust when we have these players in the game? So we give them a hypothetical money. We tell them that you've been given 200 shillings, for example. This 200 shillings, you're supposed to share it with a community member. And before it reaches even the community member, we tell them it will be multiplied by 3 before it reaches the community member. So for example, if they said spent 200 shillings, before it reaches the community member will have 300 shillings. And then now the important thing, we tell them that the community member will have an opportunity to share the money back. But now the community member depends on him or her if they want to share the money back.
Yeah.
So they may decide not to share the money back.
They might not get it.
Exactly. So that one now helps us to understand, are you willing to give out the money even if you know the money might not come back?
And who do you trust
more? And how do you
between
trust more?
The community member and
the insurance. So it means if I give little money to an insurance and I give more money to a community member, I feel like I'm more secure if I give more money to him than when I give it to an insurance. That is just why.
Because I believe that they would give me back.
Exactly.
My money. So that's the trust element.
That is the trust.
To what extent I believe that when I share with them, that they would share back. Once the money is tripled, they would share some back with me.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's actually quite interesting. So you mentioned using games and quizzes. So why use these games instead of just surveys? I mean, we're used to doing surveys, so why not just do surveys?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and I want us to think together. Like when we normally have the structured survey or the structured questions and we take them to the field, we normally somehow dictate people on what to answer, and they might answer depending on how they feel that time. But now we are using these simulated games or experiments. It helps us now go beyond like having a self-reported question by now trying to understand how people normally act without even them knowing that this is the question I'm asking. So it helped me get the real and authentic self when I'm asking this question in this format.
Okay.
Yes.
So could you give us examples of behaviors or traits that you were observing for this study?
Okay, so for this specific study, even before we go to which behavioral traits that we measured, we did a very intense literature review just to understand what are some of the behaviors that drives insurance, like which has been studied, and most of the things have been mentioned, like they are very element when it comes to making decisions about risk transfer. So one of them was trust, which I had explained earlier about how even we measured it. And then the next one is risk aversion, just to understand if people are risk averse and how do they, like people who risk averse, how do they make decisions, for example. There is something in insurance that is called the locus of control, where we want to understand how do people, like for example, think they have control of their future. Because if I feel I don't have control of my future, I may not even mind transferring my risk.
Yeah, you probably would see the importance of having an insurance protection.
Yes.
If you don't feel that you have control over the future. If you feel you have control over the future, you don't see why you need insurance.
Exactly. Okay. So that one helps us to understand them. Another one was ambiguous control, where we are trying to ambiguity aversion. ambiguity aversion, where we are trying to understand how do people make a decision when uncertainties are there. So when you know things are going to happen and when you don't know when things are going to happen, how do you make decision in such kind of a situation? And now all this one, we were adding some of the emotion questions to understand the emotion connectivity as well, and even understand how much they rely on, for example, social networks, where nowadays most of the people rely on social networks and even some social groups. And we are bringing this together to understand even more on how they play this insurance game that we had in the field.
Okay, so you measured all the different elements, the trust, locus of control, ambiguity aversion, you mentioned, what else?
Locus of control.
Locus of control, emotions.
Yes.
And then you index all of this and you compare them to how they play the insurance game.
Yes.
Okay, this is really interesting. That's interesting, Mercy. And you just mentioned social networks, and I can imagine how, our family and community are kind of like our first safety net. It's the people we run to when we have a problem. And this might or might not encourage people to take up insurance, because on one hand, if you have a very strong network and safety net, in that case, then you might not see the need for insurance, which would probably be a barrier actually in social societies like ours. On the other hand, your family could recommend insurance, could be the people you look to help you figure out what insurance product to buy or which company they trust and so on. Okay, let's then look at, just to understand a little more how you did the segmentation. So, could you tell us what segmentation approach you used to help us just have a better picture of how you understood the income versus or occupation and what other segments could exist beyond income?
So what we meant by segmentation in this specific project, it's like clustering people, putting people in a certain cluster. And the approach that we used for this specific project is, after now collecting data from the field, after now having data from risk aversion, having data from the trust game, we now have to use all these aspects of the behaviors that we collected in the field to form these clusters. And so that we can be able to define how this cluster behaves this way.
So what model did you use?
So for example, for this specific one, we were using a certain model called mixed effect model in R. R program is a free resource for modeling. So when we are using this model, we were able to, it helped us generate these clusters. And it was taking account the variability of different clusters in terms of age, so that you can have a balanced cluster. In terms of the sample size, in terms of age, in terms of income.
So this is looking at demographics.
Exactly.
It's looking at their income.
Yes.
It's looking at how the specific behaviors around risk aversion, locus of control, emotion, all the things that you mentioned, right?
Yes.
So can you tell us what, if you could give us an example of the kind of clusters that have come up so far?
Yes, interesting. So for the project, for current results that we have, we were able to emerge with 3 clusters. And what it was emerging, we had 3 clusters, which we were having a cluster that was cautious but not covered. So you might find this is a cluster where people are very educated. This is a cluster where people are very risk averse, and also they are mostly insured. We were asking question if they have insurance. So we find that this is a cluster where majority of the people are insured. And then the second cluster.
So you said they are cautious, they are cautious, and
they are cautious.
They are more likely, so they're educated and they already have insurance.
And they already have insurance. That's why most of the proportion in this cluster were mostly having insurance. So the second cluster that we renamed it and gave it a name, they are very vulnerable and distrustful. So these are, we found, unfortunately or unfortunately, this is the cluster where we were finding most women in. And because most of the proportion were women, and also we were finding people in this specific cluster having very low education level, and also in terms of the insurance, if they are currently insured or not, these are the cluster where most of the people were least insured. So we have another now, the last cluster, which it is a cluster 3. And this is, we can say, this is a cluster where people had high trust and emerged to be adopters. So what do I mean by this? So this is a cluster that we found that we have people who have high trust in both insurance and people in the community. And also we find that they are moderate risk insurance uptakers. We cannot say that they are uptakers in terms of like they are taking
Because
insurance.
they currently don't have insurance.
Exactly, so they are moderate.
Okay.
And also we can say these are the people these are the cluster of people that is good to target new products to, because they are very easy in adopting.
And because they are trusting.
And they are trusting as well.
Okay, that's interesting. So
Yes.
how would insurance companies actually identify them? Because we are talking about the thesis of this whole study is to say that there is more to how people make decisions about insurance.
Exactly.
Or risk transfer beyond whether just that they have, that they can afford to buy insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So what support can you give to insurance companies or to providers so that they're able to identify the three, so that they know which cluster or which segment to actually target?
Okay, that's a good question. So even I just to add on, we didn't stop here.
Okay.
We also did a qualitative study just to help us profile these people more, because so that when we give it to an insurance that this is the person from cluster 1, we have profiled them better so that it can be easy for them to understand that this person from this cluster have these characteristics. Might be from an urban area, might be from a rural area. So those are the key aspects that a person from an insurance can be able to understand. And how is it going to be helpful to them? So having this type of clusters and clustering people in different characteristics and how they act when it comes to risk transfer, it helps them tailor their products well, so that when you're tailoring a product to cluster 1, you know what aspect do I have to look at, how am I supposed to tailor my product,
or even whether you should target them.
Exactly.
Like the ones you said that are vulnerable and distrustful.
Yes.
They probably need a different solution.
Exactly.
Like a government social protection type of solution.
Yes.
Or you'd have to deal with the trust first, resolve that before they can actually purchase.
That's very true.
Okay. So Mercy, finally, what difference could this make for underserved segments?
Okay, thank you, Rehab. So I want you to think like if now the organizations and the industry try to now to move away from targeting people using their income, I can see most of the people in the underserved communities now can be able to access the protection they need.
Okay.
Yes.
I would say that is very interesting, because what I'm hearing from you throughout is that there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all product or solution for insurance, that people have diverse needs, they have diverse attitudes and beliefs and trust levels, which should be taken into account for the type of solutions that we provide in the insurance space. Well, thank you very much. For me, this is a really exciting study, because we can finally be able to provide tools and support to the insurance industry beyond what they're currently doing. Because I believe that right now the approach is kind of like very simplistic, that you only target people who can afford. And affordability is not an issue, but it's not the only lens through which we should design and market insurance products. Yeah. So I look forward to the findings of this study. And so even to our viewers, look out for the findings. The study findings will be at our website at busara.global. Thank you.
Thank you so much.